Welcome to the Tackling College Sports Podcast, the definitive resource to help you navigate your way to play college-level sports. Here are your hosts, Chris Legates and Mark Franco, where they want you, the TCS Nation, to be your best.
Thanks for tuning into the Tackling College Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Franco. Sitting right next to me is my co-host. He's been on a week-long diet of warm water, gluten-free farm-raised chicken, bone broth, and 2-a-days on the Gazelle. You remember that, right?
I do. I do.
Tony Little. Got to get that cardio. Crystal Gates, how are you, sir?
I am great, and thank you for those warm words. I'm feeling very fit today.
And looking fit. We've been on a long hiatus. We're back at it. Today we have the pleasure of speaking with John Willkom, former D1 basketball player at Marquette. He's also has also worked with Rick Majerus, assisting the Milwaukee Bucks. And John has also authored the book, Walk on Warrior, Drive, Discipline, and the Will to Win. Thanks for joining us, John.
Guys, it's a pleasure. I'm looking forward to chatting with you today.
Excellent. Let's dive right in. Hey, John, can you take our listeners back to your days of playing high school ball and what you were thinking at that point as far as playing goes?
Yeah, I think, from an early age, I just loved to compete. And I think my first love actually wasn't basketball, it was track and field.
Oh.
And I started running competitive track when I was 8 years old. And for the first time in my life, I actually felt somewhat pushed by my father a little bit. And it's one of those situations where he wasn't forcing me to practice in any way, but basically just told me that if you want to do well, you have to practice. And it was kind of the first time in my brain that the lights went off and just said, all right, if I'm going to beat these other kids in a race, I have to work on this a little bit. So over the next few years, I ran in a lot of races. 400-meter dash was kind of my event, and was actually a Wisconsin state champion as a 10-year-old.
At
so
10, is that what you
that was kind of my first love and first introduction to competitive sports.
John, did you say that was at 10 years of age?
Yeah, 10 years of age.
Oh, wow. So
and-
track and field started
Young.
We don't have that.
No, we don't have young track and field here in Connecticut like that, no.
Yeah, what was crazy about that was that I look back at that, and it's amazing how early competition starts, and also how early you can almost identify the talent that certain people have. And what I mean by that is, the kid that got third in that race ended up, starting at free safety for the Indianapolis Colts.
Wow.
And there were a few other kids just on that list, when you look back and you're like, that kid played college football, or that kid played college basketball, and this kid ran track. And so it is interesting just kind of how early some of that, starts.
Sure. You're able to recognize at that age.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And so track was kind of the intro. And, after I kind of stopped running track when I was 12 or so, because I just fell in love with basketball. My dad had been a youth girls coach when I was growing up. And so I spent a lot of time in the gym, and I was that kid that was always getting yelled at for dribbling a ball on the side, but I just love being around the game. And I think the more that I spent around it, the more it became a sport that I could practice on my own. And I think, and you guys can relate to this, but when you live in a place that, there's snow on the ground for 4 or 5 months, we had an unfinished basement, but there was some concrete down there. And, it was one of those things where it's like I could do ball handling drills, and I could, dribble around a cone even if I only had 5 or 6 feet of space.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was just appealing to me because I'd go out and play in games as a 4th or 5th grader, and saw myself getting better. And so from that point, I started to go to some camps and things, and I had a great high school career. I was a 3-time all-conference player, and we had some good teams. My senior year, unfortunately, we lost to the same team 3 times.
Oh, jeez.
Oh, wow.
We lost to them twice in the conference. Then we had to, fortunately, try to get by them in the playoffs. And it's hard to admit that someone's just better than you, but they had a lot of height and they had a deep team, and that's kind of how our season ended as seniors.
Interesting. So we're going to cover a lot of topics, but next question is, we're just curious. We want to know what it was like working with Rick Majerus, clearly a colorful guy.
Yeah, I just kind of stumbled upon that relationship somewhat out of luck. So when I was in college, I took a summer internship working for a sports agent, and this particular agent had probably about 100 athletes, most in the NFL. And on the side, he would do some occasional contracts with broadcasters. And Rick was in between jobs. He had actually moved back to Milwaukee to take care of his mother, who was sick at the time, and he was doing some broadcasting work for ESPN. And kind of out of the blue, he asked the sports agent if he could help him find an assistant for the summer. And he was set on having a woman. And it was funny because even after the agent introduced me and we met several times, he's like, I don't know if I want John, blah, 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 blah. And so finally he agreed to make me his assistant. And we did the most odd jobs. I mean, I've got some crazy stories, but one that I always remember is, as many people know, Rick Majerus lived in a hotel.
Yeah.
And one of his goals that summer was to move out of the hotel into this condo that he bought. And so we spent about 2 days packing up his stuff. And the first time I knocked on this door in the hotel room, nobody answered. And I was waiting and waiting and waiting. And finally, I see this giant man walking down the hallway with a swim cap on, Speedo swimsuit, and nothing else.
Oh, geez.
And he basically was like, "Hey, I just got done with my morning workout in the pool," and I just sat there thinking, like, I would have never guessed that you worked out. I would have never guessed that you were a swimmer.
That's quite a vision.
But that's kind of how our relationship kicked off. And for those who don't know who Rick Majerus is, Rick was a large man, and so it was quite the sight. But we moved him out of that hotel into this condo, and because he had lived in a hotel for so long, one of the last things that we had to kind of pick up was he had garbage bags full of hotel shampoos and soaps. And we literally sat at the kitchen table for probably 2 hours, and we smelled each one. And he would ask me, like, you like this one? And I'd say, I like that one. And so we'd keep some, and the ones that we didn't like, we'd throw in a separate bag. And that was kind of the duration of our afternoon.
Wow.
Oh, man. John, you must have a million stories about a guy like that, right?
Yeah, I think the one thing that just struck me was that he had some really, really cool stuff too. And as we moved and unpacked things, he had different autographed memorabilia from guys like Michael Jordan. He had pictures of himself with a lot of famous people. Occasionally, he would ask me to return text messages for him. And one day, I got a text, and I said, "Hey, Rick, it's David Stern."
Oh, wow.
He's like, "Give me the phone." But he always had as tough, and you hear stories about just how tough he was on players and how brutal some of his practices were. It was funny meeting him at that point in his life when things were starting to slow down. He wasn't coaching anymore. I think he probably had some perspective just with the state of his mother's health. But he would open up about how much he loved Keith Van Horn and Michael Doliak and Andre Miller and some of the players that had played for him. That the thing he would always say that he was most proud of is that he got the absolute most out of their potential.
Right.
I always thought that was interesting because as tough sometimes as any coach can be on a player, sometimes you forget that coach is just trying to squeeze every last ounce out of what you have. And sometimes as an athlete, I think it's important to take a step back and say, I almost want to be around someone like that, because if my goals are aligned with where this person is going to take me, that's a good match.
That's a great point. And John, I want to circle back with Rick in a few minutes, but you've taken us through high school, and now you go to college at Marquette, and you write a book now called Walk On Warrior. What was your driving force behind that?
Yeah, I'll back up just a tad, because I actually didn't go to Marquette as a freshman.
Okay.
I was recruited by a lot of D2 schools, and I ultimately decided to take a scholarship and go play at a Division II school in Minnesota. It was called University of Minnesota Crookston.
Okay.
And we played in the Northern Sun Conference. I had a fairly productive freshman season. Played quite a bit. Unfortunately, we had a really bad team, and we won 4 games. We were 4-23, and even though we were one of those teams where I think we could have been really good in a year or two, I just didn't like being in such a small town, and I felt that my opportunities would be better served just in a more kind of vibrant campus, to be honest with you.
Yep.
And so my plan after my freshman year was to go to a bigger school and maybe stay connected to basketball. I knew I wasn't good enough to play Division I basketball, and so I had emailed people like Tom Crean at Marquette and Bo Ryan at Wisconsin and just said, I'll do anything. I will help you with video. I'll be a manager. I'll do laundry if that's what you need. But let me know if I can help out the program. And Coach Crean actually responded to me and just said, if you're interested in working some summer basketball camps, we'd love to meet you, and we'll kind of go from there. And so in the spring of my freshman year, I ultimately decided to transfer to Marquette, not so much as a basketball player, but just because I thought that was the best fit for me as a student and kind of fit the criteria that I was looking for. And so I spent the summer working basketball camps there. I got to spend a lot of time with the staff. And then occasionally I would get asked to play in games in the evenings, some with current players, other with alumni. But there always seemed to be a game going on. And so I played for probably 2 or 3 weeks, every night straight for several hours. And at the end of July, one of the assistant coaches actually came up to me and just said, we'd love to have you try out for the team. And we think, you'd have an opportunity to contribute here. And what do you think about that? And so I was obviously thrilled just because I kind of thought my basketball playing career was over. But I went home for the next 4 weeks or so, and I talk about in the book, ultimately got myself in a position just from a conditioning standpoint to be ready to come back for tryouts. And then we started tryouts in early September, and the rest is kind of history.
That's great. That's an awesome story there, John. And I do want to kind of jump on that for a second. When you talk about the fit that you had at the Division II school in Minnesota, and now you say, okay, listen, it maybe just wasn't right for me. And it could be the size, it could be even the level of play or anything like that. Would you say now for student athletes who are looking at schools, how important is it to go through that checklist of things that are important so that, at the end of your freshman year, you're maybe not looking to transfer, or you find the place that you want to go to? Would you say that's something, first of all, A, that did you do that? And 2, when you look back on it now, is it something that maybe you wish you did?
Yeah, I think ultimately going through that checklist and going through the pros and cons is huge. I would say probably one of the biggest mistakes that I made was I was very, very focused on the scholarship part.
Right.
And part of that is just the background that I came from, and it meant a lot to my family to not have to pay for college, to be frank. And so I think I let that cloud maybe some of the things that were missing. There were other, options on the table where, the financial part of it maybe wasn't as strong, but I think just from a basketball standpoint, from a classroom standpoint, from just a overall environment, I probably would have been happier in those situations. And so I think it's important. We always talk about levels, and so many kids and parents are fixated on, what division is this, and what conference is it, and how many people are attending the games, et cetera, et cetera. I would say that the best advice I would give somebody is don't worry about that. If you can find the best fit for you and be open and honest about the things that you're looking for, and develop a relationship with a coaching staff, and also just develop a love for the school. I think one thing that I've always felt is that a lot of student athletes nowadays, they just don't watch as many games maybe as myself or you guys did when we were kids. And by that, I just mean, I had teams that I followed growing up.
Sure.
And so even when I was looking at schools to transfer to, I had been watching Marquette basketball games since I was 4 years old. And it meant a lot to me to say that I was going to Marquette,
Sure.
maybe versus other schools. So for me, had I played basketball at Syracuse or Kentucky or UCLA, I still think it would have meant more to me to be at Marquette just because of my upbringing.
Yeah. The storied history with, Al McGuire and people like that. I mean, Marquette basketball, if you were in that area, it meant something to you.
Absolutely. And even now, I mean, I look back and, when I was shooting on my driveway, I wasn't necessarily emulating, Michael Jordan or Gary Payton. I was emulating, Marquette's backcourt, who in the early 90s was Tony Miller and Aaron Hutchins and guys like that, because those were the guys that I wanted to become. And so I think, even just walking through the Al McGuire Center, which is now where the men's team practices, and waking up every morning and being a part of that and seeing pictures of those guys in the hallway and in the weight room and kind of being a part of that tradition. It certainly made the early mornings and the tough workouts and some of the things that sometimes you think about, why am I here and what am I doing with my life? It made it all a little bit easier to know that, wow, I'm a part of this storied tradition and I get to be a part of this.
Mark and I are shaking our heads right now because it's something that resonates with both of us. And I think that's, I feel an energy from you even speaking about that I kind of want to go train right now and do stuff,
I'm doing push-ups, by the way.
It is. And it is awesome. And I totally understand that feeling as well. And I think you strike a good point here that I think student athletes need to find that tradition, that feeling of when they're on a campus, this is the place I want to be. I feel it. It fits. I have a pride about it. Man, I love everything you're saying. That's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah. And I think, again, I see so many kids that get so hyped around just the perception of their offers.
Right.
And, the amount of even publicizing those things on social media,
right.
Which is fine. But for me to go out and say, hey, I've got 15 offers and I'm going to make a big deal about all of them. At the end of the day, once you sign that letter of intent, you're just another student athlete. Mm-hmm. And, it is kind of a rude awakening when you show up for that first day of fall conditioning and nobody cares, what your star rating was in high school or how many points you scored or, how many times you made the all-conference team. You're just another player.
Everybody's good. Yeah.
Everybody's good. And if you're not in shape and you're not ready to compete at a much higher level than probably what you're used to, it's the challenge, I think, for any freshman.
John, you'll have a great perspective on this, playing both Division II and Division I basketball, and obviously at a storied place like Marquette as well. What do you think are some of the common denominators you believe all college athletes should have to be, regardless of the level? I think to be a successful college athlete, what do you think you need to do?
I would say the number one thing is you have to be organized. Most colleges nowadays almost do some of that work for you. So you have a pretty structured day, but the reality is you don't have a lot of free time. And so, I always laughed because back probably 10 or 15 years ago, Rashad McCants was a shooting guard at North Carolina, and he famously got in trouble because he basically said, going to school here is like being in jail. And I'm sure the staff didn't appreciate that, but in a lot of ways, you're kind of beholden to the program. And so, just for example, at Marquette, we would get up every morning at probably 5:15 or so, walk over to the facility. Strength conditioning would start promptly at 6 o'clock. There were no clocks anywhere in the gym, in the weight room, anywhere. So you never knew when things were going to end. Once you got done with that, you'd shower, you'd go to breakfast. I had class from 8 to noon. I'd squeeze in a quick lunch. We'd typically have practice from 1 to 3 or 4 o'clock. After that, we might do some rehab in the in the cold tub or stretching, things like that. Take care of your body. Walk out of there, you go eat dinner, come back for study hall from 6 to 8 o'clock or 8 o'clock.
Yep.
And then Coach Crean at Marquette actually had a program called Maximize the Day, which in hindsight, it's a great idea and I love the concept. But we basically had a chart where we would go and we would write things down that we did to maximize the day outside of our scheduled activities. And so, for most of us, once the clock struck 8 and we were free to leave study hall, the last thing we wanted to do was go lace up our shoes again and go do, ball handling drills or, let's go shoot 500 shots on the shooting machine. But that was kind of the expectation. And so even though it was quote unquote voluntary, if your name wasn't on that sheet, that was never a good thing. And so the reality is, I'd come home every night after 9 o'clock and, maybe do a little bit more schoolwork or, even just chat with my roommates or watch Sports Center. And then I had to go to bed because everything was going to start the next day. So
it starts all over again. Yeah.
5 comes early.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know what, John, in some of our live presentations that we've done this summer, one of the slides that we actually added to the presentation just came out from the NCAA. In 168 hours, which is in a week, if you're a Division I athlete between school and the sport, 78 hours now are devoted to that.
I believe that.
Yep.
There used to be a rule where
you had 20 hours.
Yeah, you had 24 hours off.
Yeah.
But that didn't necessarily mean that you had a day off.
That's right.
So if you got done with something at 7 p.m., technically you were free to go back at it the next day at 7.
Yeah, that's right. And coaches knew every bit of that too. They knew.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I used to do demonstrations during summer basketball camps, which you pretty quickly learned were it was basically just a practice. And so even though the kids would gather around and are watching this, you're going through full speed drills, and these coaches are watching you pretty intently, and would give you an earful afterwards. Once the kids went to their different gyms. And so I used to laugh about things like that because all the kids are excited to come watch the college guys, go through drills and demo some stuff. And, in reality, the coaching staff is like, this is an opportunity for me to work these guys out.
Yeah, it's an evaluation. Yeah. Mark.
Hey, John, are there any current trends that you either like or dislike as it pertains to the world of basketball? And that could be at any level.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the game evolves just kind of the way it's supposed to. I think a few things that I don't like. One would just be the difference in officiating amongst the different levels of basketball. And I think that it's a disservice, especially the younger kids, where a lot of the true rules of basketball aren't enforced when they're watching games in the NBA. I actually think having a more standard set of rules and just consistency in officiating would probably help basketball as a whole.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the NBA is about entertainment, and I think sometimes that's hard for basketball enthusiasts like myself to stomach because it's less about making people like me happy and more about attracting a broader audience.
Interesting. Yeah. Really good point. Chris, go ahead.
John, you mentioned before that your early athletic career had track and field involved with it. And now when you look back, how do you feel being a dual sport athlete helped you in your further career as a collegiate basketball player?
Yeah, I talk about this in my book a little bit, but I grew up in a town of 18,000 people. And so for me, it wasn't necessarily that I wanted to seek out track and field, but it was something to do. And so I signed on just because it was something going on in our town, and my friends were doing it, and so I thought this might be a fun thing to do in the springtime. Looking back at it, it's crazy because some of the guys that I ran track with ended up being big time athletes. One kid that used to run sprints with me ended up starting at left tackle for Michigan. He played left tackle for the Carolina Panthers. He's now actually the offensive line coach for the Green Bay Packers. But I had another guy that his dad used to help out, and he was always just a little faster than me, and he was 2 years older than me. But he was kind of the guy that I thought, if I can stay with him during practice, I should be able to beat the kids my age in any distance. And I think it was important to have people like that they weren't so much better than me that I felt like, well, this isn't worth my time and I'm going to quit. But they were far enough ahead where I thought, hey, there's a chance if I work at this that I can be as good as they are. That particular guy ended up actually running track at a Division III school in Wisconsin, and he just got better and better and better, and he actually won a gold medal in the Athens Olympic Games back in, I think it was 2000.
Wow.
Jeez.
So he was a big time track superstar, to be honest. But it's crazy to think back that we were just kids, and we were screwing around and trying to run faster than each other. And in reality, I was running next to two people that were extremely gifted, but we were pushing each other even mentally, and learning how to compete, and kind of a who's tougher than who type of deal. So you never know, I guess, who's standing next to you and what they're going to become. But I think that when you're surrounded by other kids and people that push themselves, it's crazy how much better you become faster.
Right. And would you say, John, that because it was an individual sport, of course, maybe you're scoring points for a team in a competition, but by and large, it's you against someone else. Were you able to transfer that to the basketball court, and it made you, let's say, more mentally tough, more courageous, and things like that on the court?
Yeah, I would say that was the number one thing that happened, was just the mental aspect. The one thing that we always talked about at Marquette was just, we would play these games of full court one-on-one. And when you lost, you had to run the sprint called a 17, where you go sideline to sideline 17 times in under a minute.
Oh, wow.
To finish that is tough, and you got to really move. But to finish it after you've just played full court one-on-one, by ones up to 7, is tough. Now, if you're down, let's say, 6 points to 1, most normal people would say, I'm going to kind of just let this one go. I'm going to catch my breath because I know I need to run that sprint. And as the season went on, and as I myself even just got tougher mentally, all of a sudden, you weren't thinking about those outcomes. You weren't thinking about what was next. You were only thinking about, the next point, the next basket, the next stop on defense. And I think that from a young age, track and field really helped me, because to your point, it was for the most part individual, but I was in my own head. Mm-hmm. And I had to, walk up to a starting line where your body's kind of shaking and you're really nervous, and you're just thinking, I have no idea how fast these other kids are. But at the end of the day, this is about me. It's about, the preparation that I've put into this. It's about thinking about how I'm going to kind of run this race, and about pacing myself appropriately, and doing this the way that I kind of envisioned for myself. And so I think having that thought process at a young age obviously translated to basketball, where when things kind of got tough, it was like, all right, I can think through this stuff even when I'm really physically fatigued.
Yeah. And
I can find ways to push forward because I've done this before.
Oh, that's great. That's awesome. And it's a great piece of advice for young athletes to know. And we're big fans of multi-sport athletes. And as I mentioned to you before we came on the air, this is 28 years for me now coaching college soccer. A lot of times through the years of recruiting, I've always liked players that had backgrounds in individual sports, because you knew that they were self-motivated.
Absolutely. I think sometimes it's so easy to quit. And I read a book called The Slight Edge a couple months ago, where they talk about it's just as easy not to do something as it is to do it. And it's just such a simple thing, but everything I do sometimes on a daily basis, it's like, I could push that to tomorrow. I could let my wife clean that up. I could, but now it's like, if you have that mentality, you just take care of it. And all of a sudden, those things add up over time. And your list becomes a lot shorter, and you can actually move on to bigger and better things.
Did you find the process of writing a book to be difficult? And was there anything from an athletic standpoint you were able to tap into when you were writing this book?
Yeah, so the crazy thing about the book was just that I wrote it over a 14-year period. And I think one of the interesting parts about the whole process was just I had written bits and pieces as they happened. And I never actually thought it would be a book. My goal the whole time was just I wanted my family, I wanted my kids someday to be able to look back and read some of these stories. At the time, I just thought they were so impactful. And whether that was, the tryouts that I had, the strength and conditioning sessions, the, getting chewed out by different coaches, all of these things where I'd come back sometimes, and we talked about the schedule, but, my time sometimes at 9, 10 o'clock at night, I would just recap almost in kind of a diary type way, some of the things that happened to me or that I observed that I thought were really interesting. And so, fast forward, graduated college and did some other things. And I could never kind of put the fact that these would just live on, in Microsoft Word and never really get seen away. And so really it was the last few years that I kind of went back and just said, I think it would actually be impactful for me to share some of this stuff with people. And while some of it was maybe more personal, there's so many kids that were probably in similar situations to me, or that have a similar mentality, or just think, can I do this, or is it possible, or, what was it actually like to go through some of those workouts? How did John train for that month in August to get ready for the season? What do you do when the 13 guys around you are probably more talented than you, but you need to figure out kind of how to hold your own? And so I decided to kind of put it all together, and that's kind of how the book was born. And same type of thing, a lot of late nights. I would do this in my spare time after work, but I'm really proud of the way it turned out. And the book actually has been for sale for almost a year. It was published last September, and has been a top 3 college basketball book on Amazon during that entire time period.
That's
awesome.
great. Congrats.
Yeah, that's awesome. Mark.
Thank you.
Hey, John, would you mind spending a little bit of time discussing how student athletes can handle moving beyond their high school / college careers and prepare themselves for life basically after sports?
I think one of the coolest things that I got to do was, even though I was still busy with basketball during the summer times, I got internships, and I worked other types of jobs. The summer before my senior year, I worked for a sports agent, and we did some great things. And one of our biggest clients was Donald Driver, who was a former Green Bay Packer wide receiver. But I did a lot of things for him, and whether that was helping him through various speaking engagements or appearances or photo shoots, he always treated me super well. But I learned a lot just about the business side and kind of how it all worked, and how we added value to his career, and and vice versa. So I thought that was a great opportunity just to kind of blend my interest with sports with I guess my future career aspirations as a business person.
Right.
And then I also worked at a bank. I was a bank teller. I didn't have a car, so I'd ride my bike every morning to a sports agent and work from 8 to noon, eat lunch, and then go work at the bank from 1 to 6. And I just think learning so many different things at the bank and being held accountable for a lot of things, they were great experiences. And I would tell anybody that is just thinking about what they might like to do, to try to just have a diverse set of experiences, put yourself out there, even if it's not your dream job. take an opportunity to try some things, because it'll certainly help you then once you graduate and want to move into something more permanent.
Sure. Great points. Okay, Chris.
John, yeah, you mentioned going through the recruiting process as a high school student athlete and having offers from, bunches of schools, some scholarships, some not, some, bigger, some smaller. When you consider the recruiting process, do you think that families should be investing large sums of money in it?
I would say no. I think I've always believed that the cream rises to the top. And I think that so many people focus so much on trying to get recruited as opposed to the time that you could put in just trying to be the best version of yourself.
That's a great point.
I played AAU basketball, but nowhere near the number of tournaments and games that people play now. And I would say that I've always believed that you could go out and play 100 games in the summer. And in those 100 games, you will probably play the same way in all 100, to be honest with you.
Sure.
You have to be able to go back to the drawing board sometimes and spend time in the gym, spend time working on your body in strength sessions and doing plyometrics and things to kind of shore up your weaknesses. But you have to do those things because that's how you ultimately get better. And so for me, most of my summertime was spent doing things like that. And I would play in tournaments with my high school teams and, again, a few games and tournaments in the springtime. But majority of my time was spent, in a gym with other people that wanted to work out. And on a lot of occasions, it was just me because nobody else really had interest in doing that. And so I think spending time and just being honest and getting feedback from other people about what do I actually need to work on? And, if you think I'm bad at this, seek that feedback out because sometimes people will recognize things in your game that you don't always see. And I was thankful because my dad was a physical therapist.
Oh, wow.
And, so he would work sometimes with athletes, but just with a lot of different types of people. And one day I just asked him, I'm like, can you put together a program to make me faster? Right. And he was kind of like, well, I guess, we could do that. But he did. And I always appreciated that because sometimes you just need some direction in terms of, I know what I want, but I don't necessarily know how to get there. And who do I know that might have some expertise in that topic to get me to where I want to be? And so being open about maybe your weaknesses and being able to share those with people that you trust oftentimes can be really beneficial to you in the future.
That's great. That's a lot of great points there, John. Yep. And I'll tell you what, those are things that when we take out little sound bites from this interview, that's going to be one that definitely comes to the forefront. Now, listen, you have played one-on-one full court. You have cleaned Rick Majerus' hotel room, and you have done 17s, the 17s and the workouts and the sprints. But I don't know if you've ever had anything like the getting to know you portion of the TCS interview. Now it's really going to be heat is on here, John. So when you think about the 17s and the 1v1 full court, this pales in comparison to what you're going to go through right now.
Chris is going to hit the door, and I'll cue the music.
All right.
And here we go.
It feels good to be back with that.
It does. It's been way too long, this hiatus.
Yeah.
All right. Let's
this is where it gets real now. It gets real.
Okay. So, John, if we were to search your phone, what would be the top 3 played songs or artists?
I really have a diverse taste in music.
Good.
And so I would probably say I like Lecrae. He's a Christian rapper. I love Lloyd Banks, who's a old school rapper.
Banks, yeah.
And then my wife and I really love the Goo Goo Dolls.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
The lead singer is probably 60 years old, but he's still out touring.
Well, hey, we just came from a Stone show not too long ago, so.
And we saw them, So we understand old guys that are still touring.
Awesome.
Question number 2: who is the most famous person you have in your contact list?
It would probably be former NBA point guard Travis Diener. Travis was a teammate of mine at Marquette. He's actually still playing professional basketball in Italy.
Oh, wow.
At the ripe age of 38.
Wow.
Getting it done.
Impressive.
Yeah.
I like that. Doing stuff. Number 3, do you have a favorite quote or quotes?
I just wrote an article about this, and I love this quote, and actually I love this guy, too, just because of his background. But one of my favorite coaches is Dabo Swinney.
Yeah.
And the other day, he was talking about just kind of what sets people back, and his quote was, "The only disability in life is a bad attitude. It's the optimist that changes the world."
Love it. That's a good one.
That's going to be on the F5 this week.
We may have to borrow that.
We may have to put that, yeah.
We have to borrow that. Question number 4. Can you give the listeners a little-known fact about yourself?
We talked about this earlier, but I was the Wisconsin State champion in the 400-meter dash as a 10-year-old.
At the ripe age. Excellent. Question number 5. Who's been the biggest influence in your life?
My parents have been there through thick and thin.
Got it. Question 6. If you could have dinner with anyone, dead or alive, who would you choose?
So this was a tough question for me to answer, and I didn't want to be super cliche. So I'm going to say Andre Agassi.
Oh, wow.
And the reason I say that is because if you've never read his book,
I read it.
It's called Open.
Yep.
Awesome book. The guy is so open and honest about just his life. And if you want a raw and authentic story, reading his book was kind of one of the, motivating forces for me to finish my book. And I think some of the writing style was similar, and just I didn't want to include a bunch of box scores or stats or recaps of games, but I wanted to take people kind of into my own mind in terms of I'm not only going to tell you what happened, but I'm going to tell you how I felt when I was doing it.
Yeah.
That's a good one. We grew up watching a lot of tennis during that era, so McEnroe fans, Agassi, Lendl, all those guys. Good stuff. Let's see. We are on question 7. If you weren't doing what you are up to doing now, what do you think you'd be involved in?
So I actually work in e-commerce today. If I wasn't doing that, I would probably be coaching college basketball. It's always been a passion of mine, and I've coached quite a few teams over the years, anywhere from 3rd grade to 12th grade. So I like staying connected to the game, and these are certainly cool opportunities to do that as well.
Excellent. Question number 8. This is one of the tough ones.
Tough one.
What is one thing you believe that others might think is crazy?
I don't know if people would think this is crazy, but I've always believed that suffering is the best way to true satisfaction. And I think that sometimes, you're going through things and you're like, this is so unbelievably hard, and why me, and why do I have to do this? You always come out better from those things, no matter what you think. And so I just think having some perspective when you're going through maybe the worst of times,
sure.
If you can think about just, I guess, that statement, and realize that we all kind of have to go through things in order to get the most out of what we're capable of.
Right.
I think you'll be better off.
Cool. Question 9. What is your morning ritual?
I would love to say that I do a bunch of cool stuff, but the reality is that I'm a father with a 13-month-old daughter, and my wife leaves early to go to work. So I spend most of my morning getting her ready for daycare, and we eat breakfast and change her diaper and pack up her clothes and drive to daycare.
Excellent. And number 10. What book are you currently reading or have just read?
So I just read a book called I'll Be Gone in the Dark by an author named Michelle McNamara. It's a fantastic book, in a very sad, story. The author actually died right before she published the book.
Oh, jeez.
It's a fascinating story just about, a serial killer in the 70s and 80s in the state of California that was never caught.
Oh, wow.
Huh.
I'm going to have to look into that one.
Well, I'll tell you what, John. I mean, you handled these questions with the greatest of ease. I think you probably need a little towel and some Gatorade right now, but Mark's got a little sound effect to show the appreciation for those.
There you go. I think it's well deserved.
Yeah. You knocked it out of the park. Definitely knocked it out of the park, John. How was it, John? Did you feel that the getting to know you portion, you handled it pretty well?
That was great. I'm sweating a little bit in my office here, but other than that, it was
Not like
good.
the 17s.
Yeah. Nothing like one-on-one. That's right. Mark and I shook our head because we both played basketball as kids, and we're picturing one-on-one full court, and that's insanity to me.
Not even in the rec would I go. That was a small court.
Yeah, there was a small court at the rec department in our town, and one-on-one full court.
That would have been tough.
Not the full 94 feet,
Not
man.
the full 94,
no way. My final question, John, is I told you I would circle back about Rick Majerus. And when you have these legendary coaches and you've played for them and you've worked with them, there's sides that people don't see that you got to see. What maybe little thing about someone like him that the public doesn't know that maybe you do? You hear the Bobby Knight stories about the people that he took care of and the charities and things like that. Did Rick have a softer side to him?
Yeah, Rick was actually dating somebody when I was working for him, and he invited me to dinner one time with himself and his significant other and our sports agent that kind of connected the two of us. So the four of us went to a pretty fancy restaurant. We had a great dinner. And at the end, the waiter came over and said, "Would you guys like some dessert?" And Rick looked at his partner, and just his eyes lit up. and he looked at me and he said, "Sometimes when I think about so-and-so, I just want to eat her." And everybody just stopped and didn't know what to say. Yeah. And then all of a sudden she started laughing, and then I laughed and he laughed and everyone busted out in laughter. And I think he was just one of those guys where he had such a quirky sense of humor that I think that sometimes when you're, and I'll use the word obsessed because I think some of the great coaches are truly obsessed with what they do. And he was obsessed with basketball, and I think he would have admitted that. But when you step outside of that, I think it allows people to kind of showcase a side of themselves sometimes that don't always come through, whether it's just them trying to be authoritative as a coach, or they don't want maybe their team to see that. And so I feel like I was fortunate from that standpoint of I ended up getting a full-time job actually after I graduated from college, and they wanted to move me to Salt Lake City, Utah, of all places. And I thought, I've never been to Utah, and why would I want to go there? And but just in the weirdest thing, I hadn't talked to Rick in probably 6 months. I sent him a note and just said, I'm moving to Utah. I've never been there. And he went out of his way to send me visitors guides and detailed emails about all these things. And he actually gave me the cell phone of his assistant while he was at the University of Utah. And he said, "You need to call her, and she's going to help you with a bunch of things." And I thought,
wow,
you haven't worked there for 12 years. And so in a very awkward exchange, I actually did call her, and she answered and was like, "Why are you calling?" And I bring that up, I guess, lastly, just to sum up. I think that kind of was Rick Majerus in a nutshell. Was just the guy knew everybody, and for a lot of us, calling someone we hadn't talked to for 12 years might not be the most politically correct thing to do. But he considered everybody his friend. He was very affable from that standpoint, and I think that that summed up his personality really well.
Wow, those are great stories, man. That's awesome. Mark.
John, before we wrap up, is there anything that you wish to promote today? I know you've got the book. You can certainly, we'll plug that in the show notes once this episode is up. But is there anything else you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, no, I would just say that, I'd encourage people to check out my book. It's called Walk On Warrior, for sale on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and several other online channels. But I think the motivation for the book wasn't necessarily even to write a book. It was to to share just real life stories, and I think there's an authenticity to how it was written, and even the fact that I paused to maybe share some of the things in there because they were so personal to me. I had to kind of get over that mental barrier and and told myself that it was worth sharing this because I think other people could benefit from it. So if you're a parent listening to this, or you're a student athlete, or you want to know, I guess, just more about what it's like from the inside, there's certainly nothing in there that would compromise the locker room. But it's a story of authenticity. It's a story of determination and never quitting. And it's also a story of, just kind of one action leading to the next. And I think if you live life with that type of mentality, you don't know what's going to be next for yourself until you just kind of, pick up your feet and start moving. And so I think it's been amazing just to get feedback from people, honestly, all over the world that have read this book. And I think to myself, wow, it's crazy what a small world it is, and how basketball can bring people together from so many different walks of life.
John, did you find a book? I know you said it was a 14-year process. Did you find it one retrospective for you? You were able to go back and think of these stories as you continued to write, and also would you find that it was therapeutic for you? Yeah,
it was. I've connected with a lot of people that I haven't talked to in a long time. And I think, I didn't mention this earlier, but one of the reasons why I went back and finished the book, my wife was in a medical residency program. And it's just ironic how this works, but where she was working 100+ hour weeks for 3 years. And after a couple months of that, I started to think to myself, I can watch 100 college basketball games this year, or 100 movies on Netflix, or I could potentially buckle down and maybe revisit this book and actually turn it into a real book. And so the motivation, I guess, was kind of propped up a little bit from the fact that, I was spending a lot of time by myself, and I was able to kind of dig back into the memory bank and revisit some of these stories and say, there's a lot of value here, and it did. As you start to revisit those things, more and more things kind of pop up into your brain, and it was a fun process.
That's awesome.
All right, John. Listen, we've sort of come to the end of our time. We appreciate it. If somebody wanted to get in touch with you, perhaps you could leave an email with me later, and/or some of your social media accounts. Completely up to you. But before we go, just let me wind up here that if you want to contact us on the web, it's tacklingcollegesports.com. Make sure you sign up to be included in the Friday Five, which is literally one of the best weekly emails that could hit your box, I think.
Yeah.
It's a 5 sports-related items that we think would be of interest to you, the TCS Nation. Want to be considered for guest spot? Hit us up on one of the following. Email out as obviously tacklingcollegesports@gmail.com. Facebook.com/Tackling College Sports, Twitter @Tackling College, and Instagram Tackling College. And until next time, be your best.
Your college sports future awaits. So join the TCS Nation and be your best.